Today we're going to be making 3 different egg bakes that I prepped for my family this week, and they're a little bit different than your typical, but they're still really hearty and healthy, and I think you guys are going to love them. So I'll leave the recipes for you guys linked down below, or you can find them at healthyelizabeth.com. So this morning I'm getting started on a bacon, spinach, and hash brown breakfast pie. So it's kind of like a quiche, but instead of your normal flour crust, I'm gonna make a hash brown crust. The first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna get a bowl and I'm gonna go ahead and put in my hash browns that we're gonna use to make the crust. So I'm using this bag right here that has root vegetables in it, and I'm gonna go ahead and add this entire bag. And then I'm also going to use a little bit of just regular hash browns that don't have the root vegetables in them. So if you can't find these root vegetable hash browns, you can just substitute that for plain hash browns and it'll work just the same. And we're still going to put spinach in this, so there's still going to be lots of good greens in here. So now that I've gotten these hash browns in here, I'm going to grate up about this entire block probably of this white sharp cheddar. I'm gonna use a little bit of it in the crust to kind of help the crust form and bind together. And then the rest of it I'm gonna use in the bake itself. I love a nice white sharp cheddar, but if you like a more mild cheddar or a yellow cheddar, you could even do Swiss cheese or Gruyere. There's so many different cheeses that would be really good in this, so you can kind of play around with that. But I'm gonna go ahead and use my favorite and my kids' favorite, which is the sharp white cheddar. I'm gonna use about half a cup of this in our hash browns just to help that crust form, and then the rest we'll save and use in the pie. So I'm gonna go ahead and move this aside and set it over here until we're done making our pie crust. And now I'm gonna season it with about a half a teaspoon of salt. We wanna make sure those hash browns have really good flavor. And then just about a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. So that was super simple, right? So now I'm just gonna toss this together, and you can see there's little flecks of carrot and sweet potato in the hash browns. I just love the color. It just makes it a little bit interesting. So that is our crust. I told you it was so simple and easy. I'm gonna take my little pie dish here and I'm gonna go ahead and butter it. You can either use butter or avocado oil, either will work. And my trick, since I don't keep a lot of paper towels and napkins and things in the house, I like to use one of my unbleached coffee filters as my little paper towel when I butter things. So I'm gonna just take probably about half a tablespoon of butter here and put that in my dish. And then I'm just gonna take this little unbleached coffee filter and smear it all around and up the edges so that our hash browns are nice and crispy and it doesn't stick to the pan. Okay, so that's good to go now. So I'm gonna go ahead and take our filling here, all of our hash browns and cheese mixture, and I'm gonna put it in the pan. These are thawed. I thawed them out overnight in my refrigerator, so they're ready to go. And we're just gonna take it, and you wanna make sure that it goes all the way up to the edges. That way you have a really nice crust on it, just like you would a pie. And I'm just gonna press it down pretty firmly with my hands and get it all the way up the side. And you wanna make sure it's kind of compacted so it really has that crust texture after we bake it. Hash browns are something you can always have in the freezer, so I love it. It's a really staple ingredient, and you can also make them yourself. So if you can't find these root vegetable hash browns, no problem at all. You can just grate up some potatoes, grate up some sweet potatoes, throw in a little bit of carrots, and you'll have the same sort of mixture. But if you're lucky enough to find them in your grocery store, it does save you one little step. So you can definitely do that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and press this in and then pop this into the refrigerator and let it chill for about 45 minutes. That way when we bake it, it really holds together and forms that crust we want. Next, I'll thinly slice a yellow onion and I'll get a little bit of butter going in a skillet, and we're just gonna saute those onions until they're nice and soft. I like to make sure that the onion is sliced very thinly. That way it kind of just melts into the bake and it doesn't overpower any of the other flavors here that we have going. Now we can go ahead and start assembling our filling. So I have 6 eggs here that I'm gonna crack. I like to use good pasture-raised eggs, but if you can't find those, just go ahead and try to find a good free-range egg or just an organic egg. Any of those will work. So we're gonna go ahead and crack in 6 eggs. Now to our eggs, add in half a cup of heavy cream, or you can use half and half. And if you don't have either of those on hand, you can always just use whole milk, but the richer, the better. It's gonna make it creamy and delicious and really satisfying for breakfast. I'm gonna add in a little pinch of salt so it has nice flavor, and a little pinch of pepper just for a little kick. Before I add in the rest of my toppings, I'm gonna go ahead and give that a little mix so those eggs are nice and beaten. I'm using a block of frozen spinach that I thawed overnight in the fridge, and then I squeezed out as much water as I could. I use my hands and I kind of just break it apart. That way it just incorporates really well into our egg mixture. And I love egg bakes because this is one of those things where if you have leftover broccoli or something in the fridge from dinner last night, you can substitute that instead of the spinach and use whatever you have on hand. So it's a really good way to use up extra vegetables that you have in the fridge that have already been cooked. Okay, I'll go ahead and add in our onions that we sauteed and have let cool. Now I just have a couple pieces of bacon that I cooked this morning, and so I'm just gonna go ahead and take it and I'm gonna dice it up. You don't want it to be too fine like a bacon bit, but you wanna make sure it's definitely a small bite-sized piece. So I'll go ahead and give these a rough chop. There we go, that's just the texture we want. So I'll go ahead and add that into our egg mix. All right, this is smelling good already. And to make it taste even better, I like to add in just a little pinch of garlic powder. That just helps to give it a little bit more flavor. And I think garlic's always really yummy with spinach. So there we go, there's our egg mixture. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mix this together. Now my crust has been chilling for about 45 minutes and I preheated my oven to 425. I'll go ahead and put this crust in the oven to get it par baking. So I'll place my frozen crust in the oven and par bake it for around 15 minutes just so it has a head start so we don't overcook the egg mixture. Then I'll remove it from the oven and slightly cool it. Then I'll just pour the filling mixture that we made earlier into that par baked hash brown crust, and we'll place that in the oven and lower the oven temperature to 375. That way we don't overcook the eggs, and let the pie bake for about 25 to 30 minutes until the eggs have set and the edges are nice and crispy. I love using a hash brown crust because it makes our eggs stretch even further, and it's also a gluten-free option, so I love to just have something that's really easy to digest, especially first thing in the morning. And my kids also love hash browns, and they love to have this with a little bit of like Primal Kitchen ketchup on the side. It's just a really great, hearty, and unique breakfast. Next, I'm getting started on my roasted red pepper and cottage cheese egg bake. So this is a high protein and really fluffy and peppery egg bake, so it's a little bit different than your typical, and we are going to use a little bit of all-purpose flour in it. Or you could use einkorn flour, gluten-free flour. You can kind of play around with it to make it work for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start by getting my casserole dish here greased with a little butter, again the same way I did before, and then I'm going to slice up a few roasted red peppers. So I happen to have these in the house, so I'm going to use these, but if you don't, you could also use pimentos or even fresh bell pepper. A red bell pepper chopped up and sauteed just for a few minutes to soften would be delicious in this, so you can kind of play around with it. And if you like a little bit of heat, you could also use pickled jalapenos or fresh jalapenos. It's really up to your taste. This is kind of a basic recipe that you can kind of build off of and play around with the flavors that you like. So I'm going to use roasted red peppers, and then for my cheese, I'm going to be using a black pepper white cheddar cheese. So we're really driving home the peppery flavors in this to make it not only filling and high protein, but really delicious and flavorful, and something different that we can incorporate into our weekly rotation. So after I grease my casserole dish, I'll set that aside, and in a large bowl, I'll go ahead and crack in our eggs. I'm going to be using 8 eggs for this recipe. Then I'm going to add almost an entire container of a whole milk organic cottage cheese. So we're going to use about 1 3/4 cup of it. So it's almost the entire container. You can go ahead and just add that all in. And I like to use the brand Good Culture because it's pasture raised and organic, but you can always substitute that with something that's easier to find. You could even try making your own homemade cottage cheese. Next, I'll add in some baking powder. And the other day I discovered a grain-free baking powder. So if you're gluten-free, I found one that's paleo and it's corn-free. It's made with cassava, so I'll link that down below if you need a good baking powder alternative. It's really great. Next, I'll just season it with a little bit of salt and then add in that shredded white pepper and cheddar cheese, but you can use just regular white cheddar and then add extra pepper, or just leave out the pepper. It's still going to be just as delicious. But if you do like a kick, then I highly recommend finding a cheddar or a pepper jack. And then I'm going to take those jarred roasted red peppers and I'm going to go ahead and just dice those up. I love having ingredients like this in the fridge because they're so easy to prepare. They're already ready to go, but they add so much flavor to dishes like this. So definitely give it a try if you haven't done that before. I also added in about half a cup of my einkorn flour, and then I just put that in my buttered baking dish and put it in the oven at 350 degrees, and you're going to want to let it cook about 45 to 50 minutes, and you're not going to believe how delicious this turns out. It's so full of protein, it has so much flavor, and it reminds me of pimento cheese, so if that's something you enjoy, then this is such a great flavor. I love it. It's super cozy and homey, and it just has all the flavors my family loves. The next breakfast bake I'm starting on is my pizza frittata. So it's like an Italian style frittata, which means you start it on the stove and then you finish it off in the oven. So it's really easy. I love that I can get my skillet preheating while I'm kind of getting the mixture together, and then I just pop it in the skillet and it already has a head start before it ever hits the oven. So this is a really nice weekday breakfast. It's really quick to throw together. So you can definitely play around with the style of pizza that you're making. You could make one that's more margarita style, where you have the fresh mozzarella and fresh basil and tomatoes, or you could do just pepperoni. You can really play around with what you enjoy. And I know for my kids, one of their favorite things is when we have leftover pizza and they get to eat it for breakfast. It's like a fun thing for them. And so taking that same idea and applying those flavors to a breakfast that's really hearty and nourishing, but still easy to throw together and is really good for them, is a great idea, and it's super kid friendly. I'm going to be using some uncured pork and beef pepperoni. So that's going to be one of our toppings because we love a cheesy pepperoni pizza. And then I'm also going to put some slices of fresh tomato on there, which is great for in the summer when tomatoes are in season. I'll definitely make it again for that. And then you can also take a little bit of basil pesto. So if you don't have fresh basil, you can just use a little bit of store-bought pesto or homemade pesto and swirl that into it. So there's a lot of flavors here and it's really fun and easy to make. I'm just going to start by cracking in 6 eggs. Next, I'll add in 1 tablespoon of half and half or whole milk to help make our eggs nice and fluffy. We're gonna add in half a teaspoon of dried oregano just to help really give it that Italian flavor here. Next, I'll add just a pinch of garlic powder just to give it even more flavor and seasoning. A little salt. You don't want to do too much salt because our cheese and our pepperoni have salt in them, so you can go light on the salt. Then I'll just add a tiny bit of black pepper. Next, I'll whisk it all together until our ingredients are fully combined. And then after we put it in our skillet is when we'll top it with our toppings. There we go. Okay, now that my eggs are nice and mixed together, I'm gonna set that aside, and I have 1 heirloom tomato here, and I'm just gonna take this and slice this up nice and thin, and we're gonna use that as one of our pizza toppings. Whenever I'm slicing a tomato, I find it really helpful to use a serrated knife because that way you're not kind of smushing the tomato down without making the tomato turn really mushy. So I'm just gonna make enough slices to cover the top of our frittata. That should be enough. This is a really good recipe if you're trying to get your kids to eat a healthier breakfast and not just sweet breakfast, but breakfasts that are more savory, that are usually a little bit healthier. You can just add all their favorite pizza toppings and get really creative, and they can even help with this part. If they top the frittata with their favorite ingredients, I think they'll probably end up loving it for breakfast. You definitely want to make sure that you're using an oven-safe skillet because we're going to take this from the stove into the oven. So I'm using one of my enamel cast iron, and then I'm just going to smear it with a whole bunch of butter. You want to use about a tablespoon and a half of butter, or you can use avocado oil, but I love the flavor of butter. And now that that's sizzling, I'm gonna go ahead and add in our egg mixture. And we just wanna let this cook until the edges start to set, and then we'll top it with our toppings. So now I can see that my frittata is starting to set, so now is a good time to go ahead and top it. So I like to start with a little bit of cheese. So I'm using that same sharp cheddar cheese that my family loves, and I'm just gonna top it with a little bit of that, probably about half a cup. Beautiful. I'll do our tomato next. I'll dot over a little bit of our pesto. Basil is so good for you. That looks good. Next, I'll just finish it off with some of our uncured pepperoni. And you could also use sausage, you could use onions, mushrooms, you could use any of your favorite toppings on this. Really anything goes. And if you're not a huge fan of pesto, you could definitely substitute it for a little bit of a thick marinara sauce. That would be delicious on here. Now I'm just gonna pop this into the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes and breakfast is ready to go. I hope you guys enjoyed all of these yummy recipes we made today. And don't forget, if you try any of them, make sure you let me know either on here or on the blog or over on Instagram, because I love to hear when you guys make them and see the photos you guys send me. It's so fun to see, and it really helps to build this community here. Get all of these recipes plus more of my other ones over at healthyelizabeth.com.